Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. In the words of Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, following the Nordic Baltic Cooperation NB8 summit, Poland could become a part of peacekeeping forces by serving as an essential transit hub for Ukraine. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency is behind us. How did the new U.S. administration influence Central and Eastern Europe? Plagued by challenges, the Three Seas Initiative summit has now concluded in Warsaw. 6 Hungarian opposition members fined and temporarily banned from parliament as Viktor Orbán continues to clamp down on his opponents. Poland could become a part of peacekeeping forces in the capacity of a major transportation hub for the war-torn country. This was one of the conclusions of the meeting of the Nordic Baltic group of foreign ministers with their counterparts from Poland, Germany and France. Some of the key issues discussed were bolstering support for Ukraine and its military capabilities, combating the Russian threat to Europe, as well as achieving a lasting ceasefire with the territorial sovereignty of Kyiv. Zuzanna Jurek was in Bornholm and has this report.
We see our role as securing the access lines to Ukraine, said Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski when discussing the security guarantees for Kiev. The statement came following a multilateral meeting by the Nordic and Baltic foreign ministers here in Bornholm, who were joined by the Weimar Triangle countries, that is Poland, Germany and France. The meeting in this format is of pretty special importance. It comes at a time when some of the key issues which are currently facing European countries are becoming more pronounced. This includes primarily the ongoing issue of the war in Ukraine, as well as forcing Russia's hand to the negotiating table and achieving a long and robust ceasefire. Now, speaking about the issue, the foreign ministers discussed some of their commitments to Ukraine, including aid packages, as well as some of the defense capabilities which will be needed to force Russia's hand to the negotiating table.
We see our role as securing the access lines into Ukraine, securing the railway and airfield hubs so that others may fulfill that mission inside.
We also appreciate US's efforts in terms of making sure that maximum is done with regard to achieving long and lasting peace in Ukraine. Russia is an obstacle to that, so additional measures on Russia, pushing Russia with regard to really engaging both in the process, but also giving up its unreasonable demands.
But the commitment to robust and ongoing support for Ukraine is just one issue, whereas the need to eradicate Russian threat across Europe is growing more pronounced. This also includes the continued need to decouple from Russian energy sources, which was underlined by Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski when discussing the Nord Stream pipeline.
I think we should remember that every cubic meter of methane that comes to Europe from Russia will push out a cubic meter of methane that comes to us from the United States. And I think that should also be taken into account.
The issues which were discussed today also included the need to boost European defense spending, as well as the ongoing support for Ukraine in different forms. This included ammunitions and military capabilities, and are all set to be discussed in the next meeting of a similar format due to take place in Warsaw in mid-May. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Ukrainian officials are reporting that there has been progress made in discussions regarding the minerals deal with the U.S., a much-anticipated development offering indirect security guarantees. We are now going live to our Kyiv correspondent, Oz Chatterjee, who has more on the latest. Good evening, Oz. So, based on the latest information, do we have a date when we could expect the deal to be signed, and what progress has been made so far?
No date in mind, but there has been a stumbling block for the Ukrainians, and that was the provision in this mineral deal that Ukraine would be obligated to pay the US back for aid that Ukraine received from Washington during the Biden administration. Now, according to Kyiv, according to Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal, Ukraine will no longer be obligated to pay that debt, which Kyiv does not see as a debt to the United States. Now, TVP World spoke exclusively with Timothy Milovanov, the president of the Kiev School of Economics and former finance minister of Ukraine, about how he sees that progress for Ukraine in these negotiations.
I think that's good news that the US is not insisting anymore, if it's true, on recognition what de facto would be repatriations. And that's why it's a red line. I understand politically that for the new administration, they would have a political victory. They would say, okay, Biden committed money, we're getting money back, but that's taken out of context.
So it may be a case, however, of one step forward, but two steps backwards in these discussions with the United States. New comments from US President Donald Trump given in an interview with The Atlantic have not been so kind to Zelensky once again. Let's take a listen to that.
Is there something Vladimir Putin could do that would cause you to say, you know what, I'm on Zelensky's side now?
Not necessarily on Zelensky's side, but on Ukraine's side, yes. But not necessarily on Zelensky's side. I've had a hard time with Zelensky. You saw that over here when he was sitting right in that chair, when he just couldn't get it.
So while it may be a hard time for Donald Trump in these discussions, according to him, with Zelensky, there are still airstrikes happening here in Ukraine, Ukrainian civilians being killed daily, one person killed today in central Ukraine in a Russian drone attack. So again, the attacks very much are ongoing, despite Donald Trump's feelings of difficulties in discussions with the Ukrainian president there.
From Kyiv reporting live, this was Oz Karaji. The last 100 days has seen objectively the most seismic shift in recent American history. With the new Trump administration in office, how has the trajectory of Europe been changed? How has this affected the European Union? What are the greatest challenges the continent is now facing as the US made it clear that it is now going to step back on its former involvement with the EU? John Todd took a look at the last 100 days and the impact they had on Europe and has this next report.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The world looked on as Donald Trump was sworn in as US President for a second time. And it didn't take long for his return to the White House to have an impact on Europe. Just over 3 weeks later, America's new Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth threw NATO into disarray, telling alliance members the US would no longer primarily focus on the security of Europe.
Make no mistake, President Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into Uncle Sucker.
But for Europe, this was only the start.
We have those things that the political decisions, but also rhetoric declarations that are, well, sometimes even hostile towards the EU, towards Europe. For example, like the J.D. Vance speech in Munich.
Days later, Vice President J.D. Vance attacked European leaders' liberal views.
In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town.
The EU's answer to America's realignment has been to rethink its defence strategy, endorsing a plan to unlock 800 billion euros in military spending to make up for a potential US gap. Trump had pledged to end the war in Ukraine immediately on entering office. While the peace process has moved forward, no final agreement is in sight, and the US earlier this month threatened to walk away if it sees no possible resolution.
It's clear that what he wants is to end the war. Definitely, I'm worried that he wants to restore relationships with Russia, which I think is a big mistake, and Russia is a threat for the whole civilized world, including the United States.
EU-US trade relations have suffered with Trump's imposition of tariffs to boost American jobs and business. But the ensuing global trade war has cast a long shadow. The International Monetary Fund last week said growth in the euro area would slow to 0.8% this year and 1.2% in 2026. With both forecasts about 0.2 percentage points down from January because of US trade tariffs. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney celebrates after retaining power in Monday's general election. Carney's Liberal Party had been down in the polls until his opposition to Trump's threats to make Canada a 51st state, as well as US tariffs, spurred it to victory. Trump is also interested in acquiring the vast semi-autonomous Greenland, which he claims is vital for US security. Analysts warn that while Trump has weakened traditional ties with Europe, the two still need each other.
Actually, the United States needs Europe as a whole continent, but a group of countries also as their ally and partners in trade, in security. So my final word would be that it's more like a negative impact rather than positive for now. Hopefully to change during this next 3 and more than half year.
While Trump has remapped the geopolitical landscape, signing some 140 executive orders in his first 100 days, European leaders will be wondering what comes next. John Todd for TVP World.
Leaders from across Central Europe have gathered in Warsaw to mark 10 years of the Three Seas Initiative. The summit, which was set up to address infrastructure and connectivity gaps across the region, has been plagued by challenges. As this is one of the key political projects of the outgoing Polish President Andrzej Duda, questions now loom over its future. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Deman, reports from the Polish capital.
A decade on since Poland and Croatia dreamed up the Three Seas Forum, this appears to be an inflection point. The idea on paper is simple: help Central Europe from the north to the south, from the Baltic to the Adriatic and Black Seas, to fill the gaps in modern infrastructure. Here's Polish President Andrzej Duda.
We talked about security issues in its various areas, emphasizing how the time during these 10 years has shown the foresight we had when we built this formula.
But the reality has been less rosy. Although a handful of energy and roading projects have been ticked off or are nearing completion, more than 100 remain on the priority list. On top of that, there's been a lack of investment from partners and an era of politicisation from the previous right-wing Law and Justice administration, with the helping hand of Viktor Orban's Hungary. When it comes to Ukraine, Hungary was again the odd one out on Tuesday, as it has been in Brussels, refusing to condemn Russia's invasion. So what does the future of the Three Seas Initiative look like?
The Three Seas Investment Fund is not perfect, but I got to tell you, on a baseline measure, its returns on investment are somewhere in 15%. I would like to invest in that. Clearly, the fund needs to be reformed and changed so they can be more attractive to private capital.
Croatia's president in 2015, who set up the forum with Duda, spoke exclusively to TVP World earlier this month, and this is what she told us.
I'm glad that the initiative has survived, especially the COVID times.
But that's already a qualification if you're happy that it survived, because it means it hasn't thrived.
You know why? Because it does not have any permanent structures, but is carried from country to country.
President Duda has been a steward of this project, but this is his final farewell as he leaves office in the coming months. In 2017, US President Donald Trump, during his first term, was here in Warsaw as a special guest of the forum. Duda tried to get him back for round 2, but instead the US sent its Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright. Also in attendance, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky joined remotely as an associate country of the summit. Behind me, Warsaw's Royal Castle is a story of history and survival. How the Three Seas Summit writes its own history remains to be seen. In Warsaw for TVP World, I'm Aaron Darman.
A €200,000 penalty and bans for up to 12 parliamentary sessions. This is yet another step taken by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban to clamp down on the Hungarian opposition. This move came in response to a protest orchestrated by Hungarian MPs who opposed the introduction of the anti-LGBTQ+ law. Meanwhile, demonstrations in Budapest continue. Paweł Trzaskowski has more in his next report.
A ban on participating in up to the next 12 parliament sessions and fines amounting to more than €200,000. These are the consequences for 6 Hungarian opposition MPs who fired smoke bombs in the parliament building. That was a means of protesting the adoption of new legislation that targets minorities. The government justifies the move by cracking down on foreign-funded political pressure networks, something that the country's Prime Minister Viktor Orban announced earlier in March.
They say the same now as well as the future belongs to the Rainbow World Empire, and we represent the past.
Under the new law, organizing LGBT parades is now effectively banned in Hungary, sparking protests.
I believe that Viktor Orban will do everything he can to avoid having to hand over power, and that this is one step among many to gradually deprive people of their rights.
One of the protests included a blockade of one of the major bridges in Budapest. And in response, the government is already preparing plans to prevent such future demonstrations.
It's not normal for thousands or even tens of thousands of people to be stuck in a traffic jam in Budapest, unable to live their lives or do their jobs, just because a few hundred people decided to block a bridge or multiple bridges. We are going to prevent this from happening.
But the protesters vow to continue taking it to the streets. Another demonstration is already planned to be staged in Budapest this Thursday. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Tuesday was an eventful day. A summit of foreign ministers on the Danish island of Bornholm for the Nordic Baltic cooperation NBA took place. The day marked 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency and an end to the Three Seas summit in Warsaw. A lot has been said, even more was done, but a lot is at stake. So to discuss the above, I'm joined by Velina Chakarova, founder at the FACE Geopolitical Consultancy. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio tonight.
Thank you for the invitation.
So let's begin with 100 days of Donald Trump. Tuesday marks that very day. What is your assessment of his administration 100 days in terms of impact on the Central and Eastern Europe region?
Well, without a doubt, we are feeling really a high impact derived from a lot of the actions and decision-making in Washington here in Central and Eastern Europe. Of course, mostly linked to the deal-making process linked to Ukraine, but also obviously linked to the now generally changed attitude towards European partners and allies. So we have two-track process. One that entails the tariffs policies coming from Washington, of course, under the guidance of Trump. Now we have 90 days of kind of period to rethink what we should do collectively as European Union. And then, of course, we have the bigger issue, in my view, especially when it comes to Central and Eastern Europe, and that is what kind of peace process, what kind of ceasefire is going to be facilitated and maybe even pushed by the US administration under Trump's guidance. These are the two questions.
Obviously, from the regional perspective, one of the biggest questions is how the U.S. is going to further support Ukraine and how is it going to aid the ceasefire. Previously, we've heard from President Trump, actually in one of our reports during his interview, saying that Volodymyr Zelensky is a difficult person to work with and to negotiate with. Do you think that there is still a chance that Mr. Trump is going to warm up to Mr. Zelensky? And are they going to find common ground, especially when it comes to the question of seizing territory to Russia?
What does it mean finding common ground when we are dealing with diametrically opposed goals? Trump wants quick ceasefire. He even pursues a peace plan that practically is based on more or less territorial, political, even if you like, economic concessions on behalf of Ukraine. And at the same time, we should not forget that this is not just a peace plan meant for Ukraine and imposed on Ukraine. It is also about the relaunch of strategic dialogue with Russia. That means that we are dealing now with a completely new geopolitical situation between the United States and Russia that has nothing to do with Ukraine in a direct way. It has even nothing to do with the European allies because they are being sidelined in both tracks of the process. So I don't take Trump's statements at face value when he makes this kind of assessments about personal qualities of one or other leader. but I see a pattern of behavior here, and that is that we must prepare ourselves for some sort of ceasefire. At least ceasefire, I think, is the minimum, coupled with these probably minerals deals that Trump wants Ukraine to sign. But of course, we also need to, prepare ourselves for this post-ceasefire period, what it means for the Russian leadership, how they will use the period to prepare themselves for the next, let's say, phase of operations, because let's be real, ceasefire will only postpone, but will not actually stop the Russian goals from implementation. And the Russian goals, as we've heard from the Russian leadership just recently, they once again restated the same goals as of 2022, when the first ceasefire process was initiated, and they are very much the same, quite identical. So here we have now the situation where European powers, especially here in Central, in Eastern European countries, are more or less, of course, behind Zelensky and behind Ukraine. But then again, we have to face a kind of bifurcation of Europe, right? Because it will mean that we have to accept that our most important strategic partner is also re-engaging with the strategic rival, with the country that seeks the subjugation of the second largest European country, and by extension also the destruction of the European security architecture.
So how do you think that the US could actually exert pressure on Russia? Does it hold the cards? Because so far we've seen that the US exerted pressure on Ukraine. Are we going to see something similar because of how the political landscape is starting to look like?
Yeah, so far it looks like more of a use of carrots rather than sticks when it comes to, Russia. But of course, I would not exclude let's say, the combined approach where the US still can actually impose sanctions, for instance, on the energy or financial sector. And right now we know for a fact that the Russian economy is hurting because of the already imposed sanctions on behalf of the US leadership, already starting with Biden administration, when it comes to LNG, when it comes to shadow fleet and so on. Then again, I think when it comes to carrots, here we see two tracks, right? We see also US-Iran talks, and I think that there is some kind of incentive also linked to the Russian, leadership to some sort of help the US-Iran process also to proceed. And maybe, the situation is in a way kind of intertwined, in my view. So I don't see, honestly, a lot of, niches for the US administration to really impose a lot of pressure on Moscow right now, on the Kremlin. Why? Because the Kremlin is holding the Chinese cards. And basically, the fear on behalf of America is that this modus operandi between China and Russia is becoming far too deep and far too dangerous for the American
network
interests.
of dependencies.
Yes.
The network of dependencies. Let's jump into the Nordic Baltic Cooperation NB8. Definitely an important meeting of the foreign ministers. What are the biggest takeaways, in your opinion?
From the meeting of the foreign ministers in...
Yes, Bornholm.
Well, first and foremost, it's a working format. Now they have included also more, foreign ministers, which is a good thing. It is a format to engage in the Nordic dimension of the European security, where in most recent times we had a lot of interruption, a lot of hybrid forms of warfare. So these things can be only addressed collectively because they have cascading effects when it comes to data cables, telecommunication, energy infrastructure, and so on. So basically the idea here is to have a kind of format for the foreign ministers to engage with each other, to coordinate measures, to create more interoperability, which I think is one of the biggest takeaways. For instance, when it comes to patrolling mission, which obviously is also to be seen as a format within NATO / European Union, right? So in a sense, it's about communicating, it's about coordinating, it's about deepening interoperability, and it's about feeling some political leadership into this kind of format. The very fact that France was also part of it. Now Poland is obviously already a casual invited site, and then we have practically France, Germany, and Nordic states. I think is really the realization, and this is my personal takeaway, that the Arctic and the Nordic, dimension of our energy, slash security slash frontier border issues is going to be linked also to the European, Eastern European and the Southern European frontier. So we will have a three-dimensional kind of approach in the future, unfortunately. So we are opening up a new front, so to say, to take care of.
So many fronts to take care of these days. And finally, we arrive at the subject of the Three Seas Initiative Summit, day 2. So far, in your opinion, has it delivered its promises?
Well, it depends on whom you ask. And it depends, of course, also on what kind of expectations you have about the format. If you ask my personal, of course, about my personal assessment, given that I've been following the initiative right from the beginning, the initiative has delivered quantitatively and qualitatively. Why? Because
in what sense?
As we speak, we have, the 10th anniversary, which is in itself is a proof of, so to say, perseverance. It is a proof of political leadership behind it. Now, this is a non-institutionalized format, I must also say. That means that on the level of political leadership, we have the presidents, mostly the presidents, representing the 13 member states of countries that more or less built this, not just this former Soviet bloc of countries of Central Eastern Europe, but actually I would present it as the 13 members which are building this Adriatic, Black Sea, Baltic Sea kind of zone. So it's about the three seas. So this is the political leadership. And second important point is the representation of business. The very fact that we had more than 200 representatives from businesses, from companies from these 13 countries, plus associate partners, I think, and I would argue, is a kind of a very good signal towards a successful 10th anniversary.
It's interesting that you say it, because we've heard on one of our shows, Adam Jaser's On the Record, he spoke to former Croatian President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic. They spoke about the Three Seas Initiative, and she said that she's happy that the initiative survived, as it does not have any permanent structures. For one of the founding persons to actually say that she's happy about the structure actually surviving is quite an interesting way to put it. What are the fields that the initiative is lacking in? Because we know about the challenges with politicization, we know about the funding issues as well. So how are those going to be addressed?
Well, of course, she rightfully pointed out as being one of the founding mothers, actually, of this initiative, right, 10 years ago, to highlight one of the big problems, and that is consistency. It is mostly linked, of course, to political leadership. Why? Because governments come and go, but it's not so easy to convince governments of one or other initiative, right? So here it is about the consistency of the format, because some argue, and I do not share this opinion, but some argue that there is a lack of institutionalization of this initiative. There is no secretariat, there is no, legal form of it, so to say. This cannot guarantee the persistence of, of the initiative. Basically meaning that leaderships in each of the countries are changing. We are all democracies, and this might create the risk that next leadership might not see, not see the incentive of continuing with this initiative. I think the second important, let's say, hurdle would be the longevity of these projects. We are talking about the lack of 1 trillion mostly physical infrastructure that goes from north to south, north-south connectivity. When I say physical infrastructure, of course, I mean highways, I mean railways. We are talking about connecting people to people, not only businesses to businesses. And we know for a fact that this is actually the job of governments. But when we talk about European Union members, because all of these countries are European Union members, so they have actually the institutional umbrella of the European Union, it's mostly about how to coordinate such complex processes that take years of building between governments, right? So I think that the first initial phase, let's say the first 10 years, are well survived. I wouldn't be so harsh with my assessment on the initiative, but then again, I would call for more, courageous stance on that matter, just to, avoid politicization is, I think, very important, to avoid further complicated institutionalization of the initiative, and to stick to what we have already within the European Union. The European Union is a strategic partner. Americans are a strategic partner. We can keep this, initiative in a sense to keep the Americans busy on this part of the old continent, right?
And yet there are so many moving elements, as you mentioned yourself. It's very hard to predict what the future holds, especially now that we are going to see Andrzej Duda, the Polish president, leave office because we have the upcoming election in May of this year. Thank you so much, Velina Chakarova, founder, FACE Geopolitical Consultancy. Pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you very much.
And so this would be all for now here on the World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features, and we'll see you there.